Hello and welcome to the garden. It's a bit of a jungle in here at the moment. I've got the pepper plants, they're getting quite tall. Some of them are over 6 feet now. Got a couple of short ones here, and behind me I've got lemongrass going completely crazy. I've never grown this before, so I didn't know exactly what to expect. I knew it got quite big, but yeah, this is a bit nuts. So it is a bit of a jungle in here. I hope I can get the camera somewhere sensible so that I can actually film this video, because what I want to do today is tackle the apricot tree at the back. So we've got that growing across the back face of the greenhouse here. It's not the ideal place for it. Ideally it would be a bit wider, but nonetheless that's the space it's in, and I've got to tame it to fit that space. So anyway, this time of year it's probably a good time to be thinking about the final prune of stone fruits. Definitely don't want to prune them in the winter. They're so susceptible to disease. Much safer to prune them either after bud break in the spring or then towards the end of summer. And I pruned this apricot earlier in the year, and I did a video about that, and I went through the whole of the pruning of it and where I was cutting and why, and the sort of rules that I follow with an apricot. Now those also apply to plums, because the apricot is really a slightly funky plum. It's also known as the Armenian plum. Their fruiting habit, their growth habit is essentially the same. They can be treated in the same way. So all of that applies also to plums, and I'll leave a link in the description to that video, because I don't want to go over all of those rules again in this one. What I'm doing in this video is tackling the regrowth. So the most important part is where I shorten some of the main framework branches. So those are the main branches that are forming the structure of the fan, and in order to encourage side shoots to develop, I shorten those branches. It has had the desired effect. I've got side shoots now, I think, more or less where I want them. So I just need to go in there and decide which of those new shoots to keep and which to cut out. There's been immense growth since I cut them off. There's probably 4 feet of growth on some of those. Some of those branches are far too vigorous, and one of the things I try to do is reduce the vigorous growth, and I tend to pick slightly weaker growth. Now that sounds a little bit counterintuitive. You think, well, you keep the good robust branches, but actually those branches tend to be far less productive. They're much more inclined to give you vegetative growth, and that's not what we want. So I will probably try to remove the most vigorous ones here and keep the best placed, slightly weaker branches. They tend to do better for me. So that's what I'm going to do today. Pruning is one of those things that is often found to be a little bit complicated. I mean, it's the most complicated job that you're likely to face in the kitchen garden, and it can be tricky to figure it out. Books often don't help too much. It's very often treated in, it's a little bit brief, the treatment of pruning. It's not explained in great detail so that you would understand why you prune in a certain way. And when I'm pruning, I'm always looking at 2 key aspects. These are the keys to good pruning. One is to understand how a tree is going to respond to intervention. So whether you're cutting a branch or you're bending a branch or tying it in, laying it down, all those interventions that you might make, they're all going to have an effect on the subsequent growth and fruiting of the tree. And if you understand how those interventions are going to affect the growth and fruiting, then you'll know why you're making cuts or bending branches down or whatever it is you're doing. And the other thing is to understand the particular fruiting habit, because they vary between different sorts of fruit, and also sometimes between varieties. So with apples and pears, for example, you've got to be aware of whether the variety you're working on is a tip-bearing or a spur-bearing variety. Very often that you can find partial tip bearers sit somewhere between the two. But if you prune, say, a tip-bearing variety in the same way as you would a spur-bearing sort, you very often remove all of the fruit. So you've really got to be aware of the fruiting habits. And then, of course, you've got sweet cherries and peaches that only, sour cherries and peaches that only fruit on 1-year-old woods, and then the sweet cherries and the plums that will fruit on older wood. And it can be a little bit confusing, but if you keep in mind the fruiting habit, on what wood will this tree fruit, and how long will that fruiting wood be productive, that's going to tell you how to make those cuts. So I'll stop waffling now and take a look at this tree. The camera angles might be a little bit awkward. We've got tomatoes and plants all over the place here. So what I did last time was shorten this main branch. Where did I cut that back to? I cut that back to here, and all of this growth is new since I pruned that. And what I wanted to do was cut these branches were going on up. If I hadn't cut them, I wouldn't have all of these side branches. They simply wouldn't appear. They would just go on like these without producing too much useful growth for me. So what I need to do is go over these and sort them out. Now, two very easy decisions I can make. One is if it's going towards the back of the greenhouse here, if you've got it up against a wall, the same applies. If it's going to the wall, you can remove it straight away. If it's coming out, that's also no good. But instead of removing it, you want to cut that back to, well, at this time of year, I would say cut that back to about 3 buds past the basal cluster, if there is an evident basal cluster. Many of these don't really have that. So I will cut that back to 3 or 4, and not next year, because this wood was grown this year. This won't fruit next year, but the year after, this should bear fruit. So these short lengths that I'm cutting now should become fruiting wood next year. So this stub here, hopefully, will be productive later on. I've got a couple of bits. Let me move the camera slightly. I've got a couple of bits going to the back there. That can come out. It's just no use whatsoever. And then I've got all this really vigorous stuff that I don't like. This branch I do like, and this one I quite like. All of this is horrible. It is so vigorous. I mean, just look at the size of this. This is new growth since the spring. This, on the other hand, is lovely. That's a fairly weak looking piece of growth, and that's not going to cause me any trouble at all. I like this branch a lot, and I like this one, and those two are what I want to carry on with. Even this is too long, and I will want to shorten it again, and that is for the same reason, to encourage side shoots to develop down here. If I just leave this, I'm not going to get any side shoots down here, or not for a while at least. So I want to shorten this to get more side shoots to start filling out this space. But what I want to do here actually is take out, I think, all 3 of these. These are no use to me whatsoever. The weakest one is at the back. I'll leave that one to start with, but I'm going to cut here, and I'm going to have to get the pruning saw for that, because this I don't normally expect to need the pruning saw on growth that's only a few months old, but I need to come in here and at least remove that for now, and then I'll see how it looks. And there's not a lot of room here, and I want to cut this in such a way that I don't damage the branches behind. always a little bit tricky, that. Ideally, you'd be able to make a cut on the back as well, so that you don't have to cut right the way through. But I can't get the saw in there, so this is a little bit awkward. I might try from this side actually. Right, there you go. Oh, it's going right up the top of the greenhouse. That's an insane amount of growth. Right, now I can see what I've got to deal with here and whether I want to keep this one or not. I don't like this branch as it is, but I could cut this and allow some new branches to come off, weaker ones, and I think that might be what I'm going to do. This one I really like though, and I should have thought about this before starting the video, but I do like to sort of go through it live, as it were, and then you get to see me figuring it out. Oh, you know what I'm really tempted to do is cut that back here actually, and then just keep those two for now and shorten these. You know what? I think that is what I'm going to do, because this one's not ideally placed. It is coming somewhat off the back here. So, right, scratch that. I'm going to come down here and cut through the main stem here instead. That's just a ridiculous amount of growth. It's quite a vigorous tree to try and keep in this place. Yeah, I much prefer that. Yeah, that's good now. That is fine. So now I want to look at this bundle. So that's where I cut it back to, and that's encouraged all of these side branches to develop, some of which are more useful than others. I don't mind that one actually. I don't mind any of these. That one's coming off the front, so I'm going to cut this one short, and maybe that will bear some fruit later. I've got a very weak thing, but it's coming off the back, so that needs to go. These are too long, but that angle's a bit narrow, but even so, they would help spread these branches out here. I could tie those in quite nicely, all three of those spreading out across the space here. This one then would be a little bit surplus to requirements, so I think that one also I will shorten. This one I can keep, that one's quite nice. Yeah. And as usual, I want to shorten these branches, because what I want to do here is get another couple of branches coming off to spread out. So at a suitable point, let's say there, I'm going to cut this back. There we go. And the same with this one. It doesn't matter really where I cut it. All of these buds will now break. Well, in the spring we'll start to get some good regrowth from here, and then I will pick which ones of those I want to keep. And that's how it goes, really. I've got some weak growth here on, I don't know if I want to keep any of that wood. This one I certainly don't need to keep. I'll cut that one short. I might keep that actually, but I don't need it quite as much of it. So I'll cut that short. That could be tied in there. That would be nice in the end. This is really going as far as it can. I quite like this piece of wood. It's weaker than that. I've got one going down the back. I don't want any of those actually. So this I certainly don't want. And no, there's one at the back that's got to come out. And I think I might cut this back here. Get rid of that. This I need to shorten. And this I need to cut short as well. So that will tie in there nicely. That's the end of this piece. I will only keep short side shoots on that. I don't like this piece of wood actually. It's too vigorous, but maybe now it will settle down a little bit. At the end here, I just want to cut these short, I think. Well, this branch is an annoying fellow. It's coming from low down. It's from a piece that I shortened in the spring, and it's far too big. It's in the wrong place. That has got to go. So I've cut that short, and hopefully this will become a piece of fruiting wood later on. Now, here's a short length that I left, and I've got extension growth on it. What I'm going to do, I mean, you could just shorten that extension growth, but at this time of year, it's not bad to just cut this length back. So I left, what did I leave here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I left about 6 buds on this long length, 6 leaves, and I can shorten that now to, let's say, 3 or 4. So that is fine. Here I'm trying to develop fruiting wood. This will be for year after next probably, and I can go round and just shorten all of those pieces that have extension growth. Here I've got something nasty. I've got a bit of damaged or diseased looking wood there, so I need to shorten that. Yeah, cut. Always when you find something unpleasant like that, I don't know if that will show up on the camera, but you can see that wood is brown and unhappy. Always cut back into fresh, healthy wood. So looking across the stem there, I can see no signs of trouble. Further down, these haven't grown on, all of these, so they're fine. That one's fine. Now I'm going to shorten that one as well. Yeah, so that is all fine. I've got a similar sort of situation over here. I shortened this branch, and it's given me 2 more exactly where I want them. I will just shorten those. This is a nice weak branch here. I'm going to keep that. I'm not going to touch that actually. It's no longer actively growing, so I'm going to leave that one untouched. This one is ridiculously vigorous. I've got to do something with that. So I need to figure out what is good from here. Well, actually that's nice, and this is nice. So those two are absolutely fine. I think both of these are coming a little bit, they're coming out of the front really. You can bend the branches to a certain degree, but this one is never going to be good, so I'm going to shorten that, and hopefully we'll get a bit of fruit here. Not next year, year after. I should probably do the same with this one. I mean, I could bend it round, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to shorten that. That I'm going to keep. That's a nice, fairly weak piece of wood. In due course, this will become, I think, productive. This one I'm going to shorten to about here, I think. And then hopefully I'll get a couple more branches to come off. And that's more or less it for this end. Now I've got another big mess here with lots of really vigorous growth, and I don't want any of that. This is lovely, perfect. This is coming off the front really. I don't really like any of this. I think I've been a little bit unfortunate here. This wood is too vertical, I don't like it. I would have liked something weaker to come off this side. I mean, it could do, yeah. There's no point me keeping this, I don't think. This is all, I mean, let me just shorten this for a minute. Make it easier for me to bend it around. I mean, I can bend that. That will reduce its vigor somewhat. And then I will probably get some side shoots off of here. I might do that actually. But these other branches, they need to go. I've got one at the back. That's pretty big. I can't get the secateurs in there. There we go. And you see how vigorous this trunk is. I don't like it. This one is much better. I'm almost inclined to take these really strong trunks off of the tree entirely. I just need to think that through for a moment. Interesting. Well, this one's definitely no use, so I can shorten that. Let me take this one off. No, I can't. I'll have to take that with the saw. I'll take this off, then I'll have a little look at it. I don't like this branch actually. There's undoubtedly some bark inclusion in that joint. It's too narrow an angle there between those two branches. I mean, on a proper tree, I wouldn't keep that. This is a bad branch. Oh, maybe I'll keep it and just tie it in there. So. This branch is coming off the back, that's no good. These are already short, they're not really growing anymore this season, so that will be fine. And can I shorten that further? I think maybe I'll shorten it to here. And I'll tie that in here. Bend this branch over. Bending it over a bit should tame it somewhat. That one can go up there, or I can bend it round. Yeah, it's not too bad. This is not ideal. I don't like this really vigorous wood, but it is very hard to avoid it here because the space I've got is taller than it is wide. So I'm always going to get branches coming up through the middle. But I don't want this carrying on vertically. That's no good at all. I need to bend that over and get that whole thing growing at a bit of an angle so that I don't have too much vertical growth. So I finished all of the cuts. I've removed anything growing towards the glass here. I've cut all of the new growth that is coming out from the tree, shortened the regrowth on what was cut in the spring. I've selected the branches that I'm keeping and I've shortened those to encourage side shoots to develop so I can fill this framework in. And all I'm doing now is running through and tying these in place. I'm using this rubbery tie material. I really do like this for tying trees in. I either put a knot or then a few twists here so that the bark isn't rubbing against the trellis. And then I'm just going through and tying all of these in place. So I will get on with this and I'll show you what it looks like at the end. So all of this growth is tied in now. It's spreading out quite nicely across this space. I favoured the weaker growth over that overly vigorous vertical stuff, and hopefully in a couple of years' time this will turn out to be productive. I may get some fruit on this next season. It all depends. There's some older wood lower down that is potentially suitable for carrying a small crop, but in 2 years' time all of this wood should be starting to bear fruit. And it's much better, I think, to pick the weaker wood rather than the stronger. And I know that might seem odd, but this really strong wood, it's only got one thing on its mind, and that is growing, and it's immensely vigorous. This other stuff, much less vigorous, but potentially much more productive. And it's something I've seen year after year with the peaches. Always the most vigorous branches produce far fewer blossoms than the weaker ones. So I always like to favour this weaker wood. I mean, this is a lovely piece here. That is absolutely fine. But that's all tied in now. So this job is done. No more cuts on this until after bud break in the spring. If there is any regrowth or anything else, I'm going to leave that alone. I will tackle that next spring. So apologies if the camera angles aren't ideal here. It is very difficult to get to this end of the greenhouse right now with the tomatoes and this crazy lemongrass growing here, but hopefully you managed to see enough to make sense of what I was trying to do here. And yeah, that is it for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.